Welcome back to the Procedural Generation mini-series. Today I'll be going over how we can have endless levels within one scene by having a labyrinth built somewhere, and then while we're solving this one, we can build another one somewhere else. Then when this one is done, we warp to the new one, delete this one, and so forth. If you're interested in learning how to do this, stick around. It's going to be super easy and a pretty fun end result. To start off with, I want to point out that I've added a tag called generator, which sits inside of this microchip. We can get out a new microchip, and inside of this microchip, we'll grab a trigger zone. Now a trigger zone, as we've seen, can detect a tag, and we can make it scene-wide. So if we have it detect generator, then as long as this is up, then this trigger zone will be activated. When it's done and it deletes itself, this trigger zone will no longer be detecting anything. We can use this logic to determine when things are finished building, and that way we know when we can move on to next steps. I'll get an emitter out, and I'll make sure to turn off the emit speed and the time between emits. We can set it to once, and for now I'll just set all of these parameters to infinite. I'll grab our entire generator, and we'll be using that. Now obviously we don't want our labyrinths to be on top of each other or within the same space, so we're going to have to use the scene space transform to tell it to emit somewhere at least a little bit far away. One other change I've made to this labyrinth generator is within this map size. Oh, I didn't even make it, so let's make it together. I will get another variable modifier, and we will use this to store the value of map size. So whatever comes out of there, if map size isn't set, it'll set it to whatever is higher between these two. Now that we have that variable in place, we can use that to determine how far away we need to generate the next labyrinth. I'm going to get out a microchip here, and we can use this microchip to output a transform. Since we will want to pass some sort of data in, I'm going to get another combiner here, and we'll use this to affect the position that we're emitting at. Just so we can see how this works in theory, we can plug these value sliders here, which are all zeros, into this combiner, and again replug this back in. So we can see when we start time, it puts it in a spot. If instead of emitting this at 0, we emit it at 50 in the x direction, that will give it a different spot, which is over here, 50 in the positive x direction. So you could see how if we had 2 of these, which we won't, but I'll do it for demonstration purposes. If we had 2 of these and we used a selector to power these microchips, and we'll set this one to 50 in the x direction, and the first one will have 0. I'll use a simple setup here to start some sort of timer, and I'll set this to 2 seconds, and when this is done, this will move into the next port. And of course we only want this to run twice, so I will get a keyframe out, which will turn this whole chip off, and that will happen when we get to port C. Just for demonstration purposes again, I'll power the emitter with this NOT gate, so as long as that's not seeing anything, it will emit something, which this will then see something, but the timer will have started. So we start time, it emits something, this waits for 2 seconds, and when that's done, it will move to B. But even when it moved to B, it doesn't emit until the first object has deleted itself, the first generator object. We can see that again here. It's at B, but it's seeing something, so it hasn't emitted yet, and then it does. Then once it builds that, it turns the whole chip off, and we have 2 labyrinths. On our starting block here, we could place a tag. We'll use a microchip actually. And within this microchip, we can place a tag. And we can call this tag starting point. I'll move the tag right here to just above the floor on the starting point in the center of this sculpt here. And of course we don't want this to stick around, so we'll use the same logic we had before, except this time when the tag detects or is detected, then we can use the destroyer to destroy this chip. If I turn on X-ray, we can see these here even when we're not grouped in, and I can get out a character, like a blank puppet for example, and within this puppet logic I'll just add a small trigger zone which we can place at the feet of the puppet itself. If you hold L1 and press triangle, we can set the grid origin to match the puppets. That way we can move the trigger zone into the center between both the feet of the puppet. I'll make the zone much smaller, just right around the base of the feet for example, and we'll have this detect the starting point tag. So now if I go into test mode, I can take control of this puppet, and when it hits the tag you can see it deletes itself. If I place a teleporter, which teleports us to the starting point, I'll make sure to set this teleporter so that the feet are what get emitted, since that point is pretty low. Now you can see when we start time, it teleports there and the tag is deleted immediately. The whole reason we've done this is that we can start our character at our starting spot, which will then be deleted. This microchip with the tag will be deleted. Then, once we reach this end spot, we can use the only remaining starting point tag and teleport our character over there. We can then delete this labyrinth and emit a new one somewhere else. I've labeled this microchip create levels. We'll get back to how we can make this work a little bit better in a little bit, but first we need to edit our final room and get rid of that doorway. Since we're staying within one scene, we don't ever need to use a doorway here, but we can instead do something else. I'll get out a wire transmitter, which we can plug this AND gate into here. This will only be activated when our character is inside of this sculpt or inside of this zone that's standing here on top of the sculpt, and they press or they do some action that triggers the go to next level. I'll label this wire transmitter level complete. That's the only change we needed to do for that, so I can put this back into the emitter and we're done editing that. Out in the world space, not attached to any object or grouped with anything, we can create another microchip which we will use for our global variables. We can also use this for our global settings and our cameras or sun and sky gadgets, whatever, things like that. So I've named it accordingly, and I'm going to place a variable down which we can call map size. We'll have it go from a minimum value of 0 and up to a value of 1000. So even though this is at 0, if you remember, our chip inside of our generator will take the max between this and 10. So even though this is at 0, this will still emit a labyrinth of size 10. Also, I should point out, it's not 10 exact squares, it's 10 in addition to the starting point or the starting square and the ending square. So take away this square and the starting point, then we have 10. You see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it's 12, but close enough. I'm going to resize the chip just so it's nice and big so I don't lose it, and we can get back to fixing this or making this work continuously. The idea is that while we're in one labyrinth, we want to generate another one, and when that's complete, we wait until we teleport there to start generating the next one. We can get rid of most of the stuff in here. We can leave these things here the way they are, And if you've seen any of the other videos, the previous videos in this series, this will look very familiar in how we're going to generate our scene space transform for each time we want to emit something. Instead of having a static position, we will generate the next position every time we want to. For now, we can just work in the x-axis. That's all we need to deal with in order to get things to look somewhat okay. I'll get out a calculator and we will use this as a local variable, and this will go into A. Since we have a variable of our map size, we can use that. We'll get out the map size variable. Now by default, that map size variable is set to 0. So we'll see that at the beginning this would be 0. And of course, once time starts, it will be set to something based on whatever's inside the emitter. Currently it's 10. So we'll go to 10 after time starts, and you'll see that this will constantly be adding 10. So if we use the object just emitted to power this variable modifier, we'll see that it starts at 0. Then once it starts generating, it's added 10, but this turned off afterwards. Then it will go to 20. So the next one will start at position 20, the next one at 30, and so forth. So clearly this is too close because certain floors and walls couldn't be placed. So we need to adjust this just a little bit. So I'll set this to modulate against a value of 5. We can see how that looks. That looks pretty good. You can see there's one at 0, then 55, 155, 205, etc. And it'll keep going. But we don't need it to keep going. We only need to do this every time we're in a new level. So obviously we're going to have something trigger that. I'll use a node, and that will power this variable modifier. Now again, there are so many ways that we can determine when we need to generate the next one. For example, we could do it the second the character lands in one labyrinth. One way we could do that is when we teleport, we also send a signal into here. And if you remember, we set up a wireless transmitter called level complete. We can use that to signal something. So this way, when we trigger our level complete, not only do we warp to one, but we'll start building the next one. That will turn the variable modifier on. It will increase the calculator and trigger an emitter. Since we want only 2 levels to be generated or existing at a time, we can use something like a counter to ensure that we only have 2 available. Every time we emit something, we can send the object just emitted into the increase count. I'll make sure to set this target value to 2. And every time we complete level, our plan is to delete that so we can decrease the count back. We can continue to use our generator trigger zone with the NOT gate to power the emitter, but as of right now, this will emit something, then emit another thing, and so forth and so forth. So we'll get another NOT gate out, and we will only power this NOT gate when the counter is not full. That way, once we reach 2, this NOT gate will never send a positive signal and it won't emit another labyrinth. I'm going to make one small little change inside the microchip here. I'm actually going to get out another calculator just to separate things out. So this I will multiply by 5, and we'll plug that into A and make sure that is on the override settings. So at 0, or at the beginning, it'll be at 0 if I restart time there. Then once this gets powered, it will multiply the map size, which is 10 by default, by 5, adding 50 to this calculator. So the first one will be at 0. The next one will be at x equals 50. But we want this to happen at the beginning twice. So what we'll do is I'll get out a timeline and I'll make it very small. And I'm going to get out a NOT gate here. Now, a NOT gate gives power when the input is not a positive signal, so by default it's on. So I'll have one NOT gate in the first frame and another one in the second frame. Maybe I'll switch the orders here. So this first one we will use to power the emitter, and the second frame will then go into this input, which will increase the map size, or it'll increase this calculator for the X value. We can make sure that we set this to play once, and now we can reduce the size of this chip, or the timeline, and I'll get rid of this for now so we can see what this looks like. This is only going to play once, so first it will power the emitter at 0, 0, 0. Then the second NOT gate powered this variable modifier, and we can see the calculator X value is now sitting at 50. So if we were to emit another one, it would do so there. If you remember from last week's video, we put a go to next level transmitter inside the controller logic. If you didn't see it, it's just a transmitter called go to next level, which is attached to the touchpad button on the puppet. And this go to next level transmitter is what triggers, in addition to this trigger zone, the level complete signal. We can use that level complete signal to power our teleporter. Now this doesn't need to be seen wide since we're going to be right there where the thing actually is sitting, so this is probably good enough. Now we only need this to be as tall as the character, so I'll set it just a little bit smaller. And so we can use this to power our teleporter. Now obviously we want it to teleport at the very beginning, otherwise this will never happen. So I'll get out a timer, I'll set it to 0.1 seconds, and I'll put the pulse into the teleporter. So now when we start time, he teleports, but then when we build the next one, he doesn't, because the teleporter is not on. We now have two levels created, so when our puppet makes it to the ending space and presses the appropriate go to next level button, this wireless receiver will receive a signal from level complete, which it will then use to teleport to the next one. Oh, one little thing I forgot to change here. Let's take the wire out of this, and we'll have this NOT gate power the timeline. So now this will power the timeline, which is on play once, and every time the NOT gate sends a positive signal, it'll send another pulse telling this timeline to play again. So I'll pin this up to the screen here so we can see it happen, and I'll run things in test mode so we can see how this works. I'll start time. We can see our first level's generating, and the number displayer on the left is our other level generating. If I walk over to the end space here and press the trigger, you'll see that the number displayer on the left is showing another level is generated, and that's because we sent this level complete signal from the other one. And so now if I back out, we can see that there is another level that has been generated. All we have to do is delete this old one. Now lucky for us, this is very easy to accomplish. In our final room here, all we have to do is we'll go into this chip, we'll go into this end level chip, and when we send the signal to the level complete, we can also delete the entire thing. So I'll get a destroyer out. This result will power the destroyer. And if I back completely out of the group, I can attach this affected object to the entire group. I'll now place this room back into the emitter, and we'll make sure that we're emitting with wires so that it keeps the destruction there. Now I'll back out of this entirely, and I will place this object back into the emitter as well. And if I go into test mode, we'll come over here. I will press the button. We teleport to the next level. Let me back out here. There's our next one over there, and our first one is now gone. So now we can continue to do this over and over and over again, and every time we create a new level, the previous one is deleted. If you see the thermo down there, it subtracts 2% every time. And so this is effectively a way of having infinite levels within one scene. You can now see if I back out pretty far. Here's the next one, and the first one is way back over here where we started. Now it's not here anymore because it's been deleted. Now if we watch I'm doing an analysis here in test mode, you can see we're sitting around 0% gameplay cost and somewhere between 5 to 7 graphics cost. When we teleport to a new one, we can see that the only cost we have here is just graphics because the new one's being added and then the previous one deleted. And so we can keep going essentially forever, and the graphics cost won't rise above that 10, 11, 12% there. And you can see it dips down every time we create a new one because we delete the previous one. So our graphics cost is essentially limited by how big of a level we create. Now the only thing we really have to worry about is our value of where we're emitting may be too big. As you can see, the max value we can hold is 10 million minus 1. And so if we're ever trying to emit further than that, we'll run into some problems. This is a very, very simple fix. We will check this B value, and if it's ever too big, we can just subtract the value from itself, resetting it back to 0. So for example, we can take this, and let's say if it's bigger than, what are we adding, 50 every time? If it's bigger than 100, we can take the value itself, multiply it by -1, and add that back into A. And we'll only turn this calculator on when that's the case. So we can see it goes to 50, and then to 100. And then if we were to generate another level, I'll leave this pinned to the screen, and we'll go into the test mode. Now if we generate another level, this will increase the calculator past 100, and it will reduce back to 0. So now, if I zoom out, the next one is there, as you can see. But if I go one more, the next one will be back here where we started. I'll go back into test mode. We'll move to the next one. And now we can see that the next level that we would teleport to is back at the origin. So this will keep things so that our calculator never gets too big. Now obviously 50 is too small of a number to use, but this way we can avoid overflow. Now let me just clean this up because this gives me anxiety here. All these wires everywhere. So here I've cleaned it up so that the value goes into this current value. This is checking if it's greater than 9 million. If that's the case, it will multiply itself by -1, and that will go into the output node, which we will then plug straight back into the A port of this calculator. I'll label this microchip reset position, or reset X position. And so there we have a perfectly working, procedurally generated endless level generator and system. And we can continue to go from level to level to level to level, and we never have to change scenes. There's no loading, everything is instant. And this is a really powerful tool that you can use in your dreams to keep people interested without having to sit through loading screens. It's also fairly thermo effective. You can see we're sitting at only 4% gameplay memory. The graphics memory is just because these blocks are very big, and I don't think they're exactly the loosest blocks ever. Now one thing we may want to consider is that our levels may want to get bigger as we progress. Now these labyrinths getting bigger and bigger and bigger may not be what you're looking for. If this is something that you're using as a dungeon, for example, you may not want them to get exceedingly big. but if this was a timed challenge to try and finish a certain number of levels as fast as possible, then you may want them to become more complex. But just to get your juices flowing or your brain thinking, one super simple way to make things bigger is every time we receive a signal from level complete, we can add onto our map size. So say we'll just add 5 every time we complete a level. Whoops, I plugged that into the wrong port there. I'll have it power the map size modifier. And so now we can watch these global variables in the corner of our screen here while we test things out. We'll also be able to note the progress on it based off the number displayer on the left. We can see the first one and the second one both at 10, but now the next one should go to 15. And so we can see that these will get bigger and bigger and bigger the further we go. Obviously that means that they will take longer to create, but they could also take longer to explore and find the end area. Another thing to note about this is because of the way we set up our microchip here, we're using the map size and multiplying that by 5. And so even though our rooms are getting bigger, they're staying just as spaced apart as they should, because this global variable is what we're using back here inside of our chip here. We're multiplying it by 5. So even though this gets bigger, the rooms won't become any closer than they already are. Just going to slap down a quick camera rig here and attach it to our player. It's going to be top down. If you don't know how to do it, I'd happily explain it, but my buddy Tap has a nice video on how to do third person and all kinds of camera rigs. I'll leave links to his videos in the description below. Okay, so with the camera rig in place, we can now see a little bit better. So we can see top down, the ending position. Obviously, if you were building a game and you wanted the players to not know where the ending position was, that would be up to you. And so we can see once we get to a certain point, things take a little bit longer to generate, right? I think we're currently up at a labyrinth of size 40, and it's not exactly super fast. So obviously, there'd be something else here gameplay-wise to keep you from, immediately being able to go to the next one. And that's exactly what I want to get to in the topic of the next video. I want to discuss how we can basically put like a locked door or some sort of gate to keep us out until we've done something that we're supposed to do on the level. That way there's plenty of time for the next level to generate, and that way you're not accidentally going into a new level that's still currently being generated. I hope this video was helpful to you. If you enjoyed it, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe so that you can see the next video. If you didn't enjoy it, feel free to give me a thumbs down. Let me know in the comments any feedback you may have. I'd love to know why you did or did not enjoy it. Anyway, I will see you in the next video. Take care.